Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Changing Tides podcast. In each episode, we invite guests to have honest conversations about their mental health journeys with the goal of destigmatizing mental health within the Asian American Pacific Islander community. Due to the nature of the podcast, we'll be discussing a variety of mental health topics and possibly triggering experiences. While we and the majority of our guests are not trained professionals, we encourage you to practice self-care while listening and seek professional guidance if you or a loved one is in need of support. With that said, let's start the episode.
Hello, my name is Yamamoto, and I would describe my mental health journey as long and convoluted with lots of wrong turns, lots of false signals, and a place where I had to grope in the darkness because there was very few roadmaps or role models. When you're a minuscule minority, then you haven't got a lot of places to find some measure of support, dialogue, or awakening.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Changing Tides podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Yonemura. Welcome to another episode. We're so excited to have you, and thank you for tuning in. As always, this podcast is pretty much built on the guests being great, and they always are, but I really loved this conversation. I felt like I was talking to like a historical figure, and I think she is. I really think she will go down as someone that made history. So I really don't want to get in the way of preventing you from hearing this conversation I got to have with this guest. So I want to just go ahead and get into it. You don't want to hear from me, you want to hear from today's guest. So with that said, here's the interview that I had with Mia Yamamoto. Mia, thank you so much for joining me. I was telling you before we started recording this meeting, but we were introduced to one another through Terry Koyanagi. And Terry, ever since she introduced me to you, I've been really looking forward to recording this episode. But I loved your explanation of your mental health journey, the wrong turns, the lack of role models in your path, and lack of a roadmap. So with all of that in mind, I'd love to hear, why you described it as this.
I think being a transgender kid, trying to grow up in a place where it seems like there's nobody else in the world like you check around little places, try to find other people that have any measure of similarity with respect to the experience, trying to find something to compare it to, trying to discover oneself. And I think it happens with kids very early. So my experience is that it is like being bounced around in a pinball machine, probably. You do find some times to bounce up and down, and eventually you end up right back restarting.
Mm. Mm. So there's so much to discuss with you, and in trying to navigate your mental health journey, there's so many avenues we could go. But I think to really get a full understanding, I would love to know when you would say your mental health journey began.
Like most transgender people, it begins about the time you discover that you are transgender, which is usually about 5 or 6 years old, which is the case for me. Um, it's one of the earliest things you become aware of is that you have an identity, and the first thing you experience is the mismatch, that you are relegated into a rigid dichotomy on which you feel you're not on the right side of that line. And that feeling starts very early. It starts, like I said, most people and I've checked, talked to a lot of trans folks and read innumerable case and clinical histories. And the earlier appears to be the norm. And so you start discovering that mismatch, and that's when I think the mental health journey begins, because you are encouraged, because you are so singular, by the community around you, that you are singularly weird and that completely outside the norm, outside of people's expectations, and even beyond their limits of what they will accept in another human being. So those things are brought home to you very early. So I would say the mental health journey started when I was 5 or 6, because if it meant trying to find a place in a community where you're entirely mismatched, and chronically mismatched. And it appears to be the nature of the community that you're immersed inside that the crisis begins. And
Mm,
spreads to your family, to your classmates, in my case, to my church, um, and into school, all the way through, completely out of touch with the gender to which you've been assigned,
hmm
and completely instinctively, reflexively responding to stimuli and to your life in the same way that a woman or a girl would respond,
mm.
emotionally and spiritually, if not physically. So yes, I mean the mismatch gives rise to a lot of mental health, uh, anxiety.
Mm. So I appreciate that you continue to refer to this as this mismatch, because I think that breaks it down to, if folks might not understand what transgender is, you could describe it as a mismatch, and that could kind of open someone's eyes, I think, and it's very a layman term for what you were experiencing. But I'd also like to know, like you said, you started to notice this when you were 5 or 6 years old, that you had
Yeah.
this mismatch. But when did you really figure out the vocabulary to describe this feeling? Did you always consider it a mismatch, or when did you figure out the verbiage for it?
The honest truth, and this is the weirdest thing ever, is the first time I ever heard the word transvestite was in the movie Psycho,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
where after Anthony Perkins is arrested, dressed in his mother's clothing, the detectives are sitting around the table discussing, you know, what happened here. And one of them says, "Well, they're not just a transvestite because that's all they do is get dressed up in the clothing of the opposite sex." And boom, that really struck me. I had a word,
Huh.
and I could look up that word, and I could, and the word wasn't very helpful in a sense because all it said is the person who prefers to wear the clothing of the opposite gender. But I had a word, and I could look through it, I could search through the libraries and every place else in the world to try to find the answer to this anxiety, to this mismatch. So um, that was the first time I heard that word. And the word transgender did not exist until fairly recently. There were two words. One was transvestite, and the other one was transsexual. And they meant two very different things. Um, Although sometimes one is the stage of the other. A person can start off dressing, and it brings home to them that their identity is someplace completely different than what their birth gender, their assigned birth gender, and that mismatch, that that is complete continuing anxiety, which is really only quelled when you transition. You actually go through transition, come out and do what transgender people do, what we do.
Mm,
But the main thing is this, yeah, I mean, the mental health journey was to believe very sincerely that I was mentally ill and that I was suffering from a sickness that, like all sicknesses, if you know the motif, you look for a cure for that sickness. You search for a cure. And for me, at least, after a lifetime of searching, I decided to settle for a cause.
mm,
Because if I could find a cause, I felt like I could search for some kind of cure. Um, those are so many. I think it's a fuel journey that a whole bunch of people go through. That I think gay people just generally go through searching for what the fuck is wrong with me. You know, why am I feeling and looking at the world the way I do? What's wrong with me? I
mm.
think that is a, sort of a common motif that I have heard from in the rest of the queer community.
Yeah.
Um, so that part of it, feeling mentally ill, has been a journey that I think culminates in thinking that I'm really not mentally ill. I just have to address the mismatch, and that, in terms of a simple solution, which it's really not. Anybody would person say there's nothing simple about it, but at the same time, that one act, that one revolutionary, rebellious act, absolutely brings peace, joy, um, comfort, relief.
Mhm.
In so many ways, all one had to do was acknowledge and embrace one's identity in order to go forward peacefully and gracefully, hopefully.
And speaking of lack of roadmaps or role models, the first interaction with this transvestite word is in the movie Psycho, which
Yes,
definitely isn't the role model necessarily
you want to be
for,
that one.
right. So, like, considering that's your first interaction, I can only
It sort of
imagine.
confirms the mental illness diagnosis
Right,
that we're self-diagnosing at
right,
that time. And I was a teenager when this was happening. I'd never seen the word before. And it
right.
absolutely sent me, flying to the library, trying to find everything I could find under that word.
Uh-huh.
It just shows the kind of isolation that trans people feel. There really aren't resources around them. There's no conversation available, and very few therapeutic sources, or certainly knowledgeable ones. So I went to some ones.
Yeah.
I had some therapists that really you wonder where they got their license because they're just so completely fixated on their own ideas
Mm,
that they can't really look at the data.
right, right.
Can't look at it honestly, anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Even nowadays, there have been instances where we've seen that, even in like this day and age. And I know, I mean, you can look at the news, and this day and age, it's hard to see the progress that we've made in this matter. Like, and especially in certain states across this
It is hard to
country.
see progress.
Yeah,
See progress. I mean, I know. I think I see progress, and I'm really happy for everybody. But I see the confrontation between us and the right wing Republicans who are using trans people as their political their means of getting to the bigots in order to get their votes. And
right.
so attacking trans people for political gain, for political advantage and political benefit is something that now I get up when I get a chance. I speak out against that. I feel like if I've got this platform, any kind of an opportunity to be in dialogue or conversation or when I make speeches, I always make sure I include the significance of the attack on transgender people. So that's politically something that I'm all over it.
Right,
Basically,
right.
I just got an award from criminal justice section of LA County Bar Association, and I just let it rip.
Mia, that's something I'm going to want to ask you about is all these awards that you've gotten. But
Yeah.
before we get into that, because I still want to ask a little bit about your early years, because again, there's so much I want to talk to you about. But
Okay, sure. Yeah.
yeah, in your first 5 years of life,
Mm-hmm.
even then you were going through you were going through this mismatch realization, but you were also going through a very huge event in Japanese American history as a whole. Did you have any memories of your experiences at this time, and where were you?
Well, I was born in 1943 in Poston, Arizona, the camp there where that my family was sent to, and it was a result of a whole lot of different things because my dad was actually a community activist, and I'm clear when I look back in a retrospect in terms of how they moved our family out of the Manzanar community, sent us to Poston, because he was an agitator, he was a protester, he was a dissident, he was opposed to the incarceration. And interestingly enough, at that time, the Japanese American Citizens League was essentially aiding and abetting the concentration camps. They were the collaborators. And they, of course, were in conflict with my dad, you know. But anyway, so, I mean, that I came out of camp feeling like that same kind of mismatch.
Mm,
We are Japanese Americans, but we're Japanese.
right.
And they are treated differently, and they feel as though it's a justified thing that they can do. They can treat us that way if you're at war with Japan. And there were a lot of things that my father was known for was fighting for the Issei because he felt that the Issei were being marginalized and really sort of like put on the edge because the citizens didn't want to be associated with them. They were labeled as enemy aliens. And my dad felt that they were the ones that were being scapegoated and treated worse than the citizens. And they were being aided and abetted by the citizens. So his thing, he was fluent in both Japanese and English, and he was a lawyer, of course. So advocating for people was his thing, and advocating for the powerless. In the case of the non-citizen Issei, was something that well, that would be the theme of his life, actually. So that's something I got to see coming back to East LA because that whole thing was happening because I was witnessing the resettlement. We moved back to East LA eventually, and where we had lived before the war. And I got to see sort of the attitude of everybody towards the Japanese, which was not real good. Even the Mexicans didn't like us. It was
Hmm.
like, wow. At least at first, they
Right.
realized my mom turned Mexican when we were living in East LA. She could speak Spanish really well, got really good cooking with all the moms over there. But in any event, so that being Japanese is another form of mismatch in the sense that, you know, what they did to us appeared to be fine with everybody. The fact that everybody sort of disliked us was consistent with the idea that they would put us all in camp. The idea that they would drop atomic bombs on Japan, wasn't my country, but it just seemed kind of like that's was okay with everybody because, if it was even if it was Germany, people would be horrified that we would annihilate white people with such impunity. So you're very specifically reminded of your race and
Right.
its significance in society and its sort of disfavored status in society. So to be that and to be in that intersection, to be different, to be weird,
Mm.
to stand out in any negative way was a really horrible thing to a resettling Asian American community trying their best to fit back in, to be accepted, to be treated with any level of equality after that experience. You're trying really hard. Every person that would do something like go out dressed as a woman, for instance, would be seen as a disgrace and a scandal and something that's sort of a black mark of the community. So um, that kind of a thing is something I was really brought up and I could see it all around me. And not just the distaste for Japanese people, which was out there, um, but the distaste for anybody who was effeminate
Mm.
males, effeminate boys, um, the level of sort of like disgust that would incite in others was was it was certainly telling. From my point of view, was another part of my education. So that level, I mean, that level of you adopt. I mean, I'm sure you've heard this other people too. The racism and the homophobia around you, you have a tendency to try to incorporate it and even internalize it for the purpose of trying to be like everybody else. And as despicable as it is to fit in with the bigots, you have to be able to talk that language and to try to adopt that perspective. So it happens in a racist place, a racist country, that 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 sometimes to conform, just to be like everybody else, you have to take on some pretty evil um, attributes.
Right.
Thank goodness there are pockets of humanity all around us. Actually, there's always some people that got some sense, that got some morals, and can guide you. And that's where it comes from. All the leaders, all your role models, everybody else, none of them were trans. The ones
Mm.
I ever came across, it was like I said, there wasn't even a word for it for most of my life. I do remember. Oh, I was gonna mention 1959 is when Christine Jorgensen came out. She was a former soldier. George Jorgensen went to Denmark or some one of
Huh.
those Scandinavian countries and got a sex change. And it was the biggest deal in 1952. It made all the papers and all the news and everything else. But the response that people had to it was complete revulsion and and disrespect.
Right.
So that phenomenon, I remember reading it in the papers. And I take the paper to my mom. They say, "Hey, mom, there's something else like me out there in the world." And she's ironing. She's looking at the eyes. And she lowered her head. And I could see this was not going over well with her. She looks at me. She starts crying. And that changed my trajectory with respect to even being openly trying to find out about it. Basically, I said that
Hmm.
was really drove that underground in that sense.
Uh-huh.
From that point forward, really, I never exposed her to it. Really, I tried so that she never saw any of it or was ever. And yet, I will say I shared this with your mom for your podcast. Actually, she was the coolest person in the family because when my father died, there was a gay person that came and lived with us. We had like a little boarding house there in the middle of Los Angeles. And I remember that at one point she came to me, she says, "Hey, I'm in this band." She was a musician. She played all these different instruments. She played mostly guitar, ukulele, and saxophone. But anyway, she's, "I'm playing in this band, and these men are homosexuals." She was playing in a gay band, And she said, don't tell your brothers, they're going to really be upset. It was like, he says, but I really like them. They're a lot of fun. They call me Auntie Mame.
How fun. How cool.
Yeah, she was having a good time, and she never told them. She
Wow.
went to her grave without telling, because she always felt that, that the only person that was not going to judge her was me because I was so weird to begin with. You know what I mean? She knew it was cool with me, whatever. I thought it was fabulous. I thought it was so cool that she would be so readily accepted by these other musicians. And these guys were rich. The guys she
Uh-huh.
was hanging out with were all lived in the Hollywood Hills, and they were designers, interior designers, fashion designers, and they were fabulously rich, all of them. And so she hung out with this crowd that showed her a really good time. It's where the
Cool.
parties that they went to. But she described these guys, and it was so funny. I mean, she said, "There's a guy named Fifi. I swear, his name is Fifi." She said another
Wow.
guy that he says he acts like an animal and he wears leather. She was just so fascinated by these guys. It was hilarious.
I'm sure at that time it was probably just a totally different world that never
Yeah.
has been exposed to. Yeah. So, I know you said your dad was a lawyer,
Mm-hmm.
but, what made you decide to pursue the career in law? Because you could have gone the musician route, joined this awesome band with your mom, or follow it, like go the law uh, pursuit. But what inspired you to do that? Was it your dad or just what you were seeing around you?
You know what's interesting? I, I went into the army,
Hmm.
and at the time I went into the army, I had just graduated college, and I really didn't see any kind of a future. It wasn't until I realized that I was probably going to survive the Vietnam War that I decided to apply for law school. And really, I guess that was guided by my dad. I didn't really know what he did. I mean, there was very few Asian American lawyers around any place in those days. He graduated Loyola Law School in 1928. So his practice was out in the dark ages of the segregated bar. So that's a really different kind of life that he lived. But in any event, um, I saw what he did. And really, I really never, I thought about it. I applied to law school in my law school application. I remember telling UCLA that the reason I'm applying to law school is I'm a poet, and I'll never make any money being a poet, so I need a job here to support my art. And they actually accepted me early. I mean, I guess they thought
Wow.
I didn't really think they would take me in, so I figured why not tell the truth, But anyway, so my dad, though his history of being a civil rights activist, a human rights activist, and never letting go sort of the morality of the work. He had a couple of them. For instance, he was very religious. He didn't do divorces. He refused to do a divorce.
Hmm.
Anything that was from him, exploitative, um, was immoral. He felt that getting rich off the misery of other people was completely immoral. So we were always poor, but I have no problem with that. I'd much rather, in retrospect, have had that legacy
Yeah.
than to be some rich, person. I've seen how it takes to get to be rich. What I'm saying. In any event, so the fact that he was so committed to his principles and so caring of other people, basically, that's something I thought was a pretty good. Honestly, when I was a little kid, I used to go to his office, and I'd be sitting there reading comic books, waiting, in the waiting room there, because after school to get out of his office, my mom would pick us up. There'd be a guy sitting next to me, looking through his papers. Man, the dude was like really anxiety ridden. They go up to the door, how Buddhist people are, they bow and stuff like that. He goes in, and then this really worried cat would come out, and he's bawling, and he's smiling, and he's happy, and he goes out the door, and I'm thinking, wow, this cat, my dad made him happy, go back and look at it, just a bunch of books in there, man. It's like, uh, he must be a therapist, I figured.
Huh.
That was the closest I could come to it, honestly. So when it came time for me I'm going to get out of the army, what am I going to do? I wasn't sure I was going to get out of the army. I was in like the middle of my tour in Vietnam,
Wow.
but I figured two things. If I get accepted to law school, which was the next step, then I get a slightly early out. They can give you 30 days out. That's like huge when you're when you're in a war zone. As much as depending on how much time you needed to get to the school that was starting. So I got a little bit of an early out, and it's like I applied for law school, and I sort of found my way. I mean, honestly, because in my first year of law school, I just wanted to show the white boys what we could do. We were the first Asians, and I just felt really a big old huge chip on my shoulder about being an Asian American lawyer. And I just wanted to have the highest grades in the school. That's all I wanted, basically. Uh, that didn't happen, but I was up there because I made the effort.
Mm,
But in our second year of law school, I realized that there weren't very many Asian people in the law school.
right.
And what happened was there had never been more than two Asian Americans in the UCLA Law School in any year before we started. But there was like seven of us my year. So you kind of get complacent, right? You figure, okay, they're doing right by my community. Next year there was two.
Mm,
But we organized. And that was like the start of sort of an organization because I had been involved with the anti-war, community, but not the Asian American political
huh.
community. I had never been involved in that really. I mean, my dad had been a civil rights activist, but primarily for the Black community.
Hmm.
It wasn't kind of for us. It was, although he wasn't active with Japanese American groups and stuff like that. But getting involved with organizing Asian Americans in law, I use the example of the Chicano law students, and they just happen to be my friends anyway, and the Black law students, and they actually helped guide the Asian American law students into existence and into action, basically, because we had a lot of things that we had to get done in order to establish a student group. Because law school is only 3 years, and we started in the second year. And we've got 2 years to get this done, get organized, get situated, and then start advancing towards our mission, which is at the time it was inclusion of Asian Americans, but it was also inclusion of all minorities. And we were part of a larger movement. I mean,
Hmm.
they were there, and they really were very welcoming and inviting of our participation. And that's when it kind of all started. I mean, in terms of organizing people, I had never organized people before that. Going around the law school, we had a Xerox machine. We're going to have a meeting. The Asian law student is going to be in room 1437 at lunch. Bring a bag, lunch. We're going to talk about, and believe me, I got some bullshit from people like, oh man, who do you think you are? The Martin Luther King and the Buddha heads? You get that kind of scoffing. I had this one guy, I remember Gary Yano tells me, he says, why should I help, these people? I'm going to be competing with them when I get out of school. I said, the answer is, if that's your perspective, you need to go find another group, because we're going to try to help those very folks that
Right.
you're going to be competing with. And if you have that attitude, man, you ain't going to be competing with anybody. You
Yeah.
ain't going to be any good, period. We don't need you in the courts. In
Yeah.
any event, so we had a whole variety of responses to organizing. And that was my experience with it. And I realized if you have a good sense of humor, you can be an organizer because no matter which crappy people, you got to fixate on your goal and your mission and your ideals. And nobody can shake you once you understood what it is you feel like you've got to do. So that was my experience. I carried that through to law. That's why I was motivated to organize all these organizations. Really started with the law student organization, but it's still, I'm still looking for the 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 critical mass to fight back against the fascist right wing of the Republican Party. Um, that's always sort of a continuing struggle, kind of like working at the grassroots and trying to do education, trying to get involved in dialogue and conversation. But it's, to me, it's always been, it's more important to lead a group than to be an individual principled voice, no matter what it is, because you eventually paint yourself into a corner with your ideals.
Mm,
And that's fine if you don't mind being completely uninfluential. You
yeah.
don't matter about that. But it's like RBG used to say, right? Fight for what you believe in, but do it in a way that brings other people along, that motivates them to want to be a part of the same campaign, the same movement. Yeah, I do that all the
Hmm.
time with respect to the stuff are you on Facebook, by the way?
I am.
Okay. Why don't you
Yeah.
send me a set of speeches I made to the criminal justice section of County Bar, and I want you to check it out. It's only
Okay.
10 minutes. It's only 10 minutes, but it's you know. My wife said it was good, so that means it was okay. It's better than
Okay.
some of the ones I've done before.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. No, please, definitely. I'll get that link from you afterward.
Okay.
But you've discussed like the law school and how there weren't many of you Asian American law school students, but how did that translate to being an Asian American lawyer when there weren't many of you? Like, how were the early days of your career?
I feel like it was always still that I had a chip on my shoulder. I want something to prove. I felt the weight of the community on my shoulders. There was not very many Asian Americans, probably, and so I felt a very strong sense of duty. That's always been a driving force in my life, and I felt like, yeah, I mean, that was two things. I mean, I wanted to do as well as I could in law school. I wanted to show the white boys what we could do academically. Then I've always sort of my ideal was to work for the poor. So I always felt that was the highest calling, to try to even the score for some of these folks. So anyway, I went to work for Legal Aid Foundation of LA, um, practicing poverty law, which is civil law for poor folks. And after that 3 years, I joined the public defender's office. And so I translated that way. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, if you think about it for a second, the things that were closest to my heart are prisoners, are
Mm.
people that are incarcerated. And in our case, we were guilty. We were Japanese American, you know. you know, and when I was a beginning public defender, we got a lot of cynicism. There are very few Asian Americans in the courts. And I got a black client. He's a tough guy. And he's been around. He's been in prison. Blah blah blah. And he's asking me, "Why should you care about me?" You know what I mean? You're this Asian American. You're the white man's auxiliary. You know what I mean? As far as we're concerned,
Huh.
And I would tell him, dude, I was born doing time. You think
Mm.
I don't know that? And if you think I don't understand that people get put in jail for their race, then you don't understand me or my history. And I'll tell you something else. I'm asking for your trust. Don't trust me. I will prove myself to you before this is over. I promise you that. Don't trust me. Don't trust anybody who says trust me. So that was my attitude when I was starting off as a public defender. It was always like, I don't want to be breaks. I want to be able to do this as well as anybody else. I want to show you what we can do. I'm sure you not only we can do it, we can do it better.
Mm.
And if we can't do that, then we got no business elbowing our way into this profession. Certainly at the highest levels in the trial courts, where you got to put it on the line.
Yeah.
So the work, yeah, I mean, for the longest time, it was mostly um, when you're a public defender, it's an all-consuming job. You don't have that many nights to yourself. But I still managed to start a rock and roll band during that period of time and actually worked the streets for 25 years.
Wow. I didn't know
Yeah,
that.
you know, to get gigs, yeah, I mean, that's pretty hard. But I got the gigs. I mean,
Wow. So you did end up pursuing both
a
your
little bit,
mom
yeah.
and
I
your.
mean,
Wow.
we played the Orpheum Theater, we played the Hollywood Palladium, we played all the clubs, discos, and
Wow.
places in Los Angeles. We start off there. You're playing quinceañeras, you're playing, bar
Yeah.
mitzvahs, you're playing weddings, you're playing birthday parties, graduation parties, and we did a lot of that. But the more you play, the better you get, honestly. And by the end of that 25 years, I had like 100 songs completely memorized. I didn't
Wow.
have to read them anymore. I had the chords completely, and all my parts memorized in terms of like the band, arrangements. And I got to the point where I could hear it on the radio. I know exactly what my part was in a band. What I had
Mia,
because
I'm
that's
gonna need the link not only to your speech on Facebook, but I'm gonna need the link to your band performances as well now.
okay.
Yeah.
That's one. Yeah. Okay. Some of that gets recorded. Some of it doesn't. Some of it's real.
Yeah, yeah. So you're going through all this work life. You're also working gigs, and you've worked through so much of you've already done so much, but in the back of your head, because to my understanding, you're still dealing with this mismatch
Oh,
because it
absolutely.
wasn't until later into life when you really fully addressed it. So can you discuss this mismatch and how that's still playing in the background, or maybe it's at the forefront, but how that's playing through while you're doing all of this?
I think a couple of things that actually got me through that period of time. The music definitely got me through. It kept me alive in many ways because I always had another gig, another rehearsal, and others. I couldn't let my band down because your band becomes, in many ways, a more important family than even your family. You travel with them, you work with them, you go through a lot with your band. And I was with them for 25 years, so that was one source of life for me. It was one way that I had to keep going. I couldn't snuff myself out. But the politics at some point, yeah, started to matter to me. I left the public defender's office after 10 years. And the reason I left is because I had to get involved in political dialogue. I had to fight against the death penalty. That was my number one goal coming out of law school. I'm going to fight again. I'm coming out of the public defender's office. I could no longer be employed by the government and continue to defy and basically fight against the government on the death penalty. So I went out, and that's when I organized. I got out and I joined the Japanese American Bar Association, primarily because they had a Korean president. So I kind of liked the diversity that we were in any event. And then I started a group, and it was a group to fight for the Supreme Court for Rosebird, Joseph Godin, and Cruz Reynoso, because they were being targeted by the Republicans for their refusal to affirm death penalty sentences. And so we went out with a joint bar association, Korean, Japanese, Filipino, and Chinese. And we went out to all the communities and went to the schools, the churches, community organizations, and we lost. We lost. All three of those justices were defeated at the polls, and they were replaced by pro-death penalty jurists, and people started dying in California. And I couldn't get away from that. I became the president of the California Attorneys for Criminal Justice, which is a statewide criminal justice organization. I got involved with a whole bunch of different, I'm not going to mention all that, but I mean, I got involved with organizations, and I realized that organizations matter, that large populations in advocacy for issues matters more than small populations of people arguing for issues. So I'm always searching for ways in which we collaborate in a principled way. I want to just one organization we call the Multicultural Bar Alliance. What we did was we got after Latasha Harlins was shot to death by Sun Jadu in 1988 or 9, we got together, the Black and Asian bars. We organized to go out to the community to show them that we're united, that we are not each other's throats like the media would like to depict us as being, and that we seek to empower our communities against the white power structure, against white supremacy. And in 1992, we lost that one too. It's like the riots started over, and it was all the things that we were trying to stop happened, and we continued them. We still continued, and we continued under three different principles. One, support for Black and Brown students in higher education. Issue number one. Issue number two, justice and humanity for immigrants and for the rights of immigrants. And number three, gay rights, the rights of gay people to marry and to adopt, etc. Now, you talk about controversy. This is the 1980s. So reconciling people to these three principles, these three core principles, was work. It took a lot of dialogue, took a lot of conversation. People had to set aside some of their religious beliefs, and some people never did. And to me, it was just like a pill sale. If you couldn't be there for everybody, then get out. If you can't be there for the people that need advocacy for this larger mass, then go find someplace else to be, in coalition. But our coalition is going to be committed to core values. And I think the process, though, is still valuable to me, is that we continue to dialogue, that we continue to get people who are not in a place. I mean, lawyers are influential, and these are all bar associations. So they're all associations of lawyers. I always feel like same thing, right? What would it have been like if the concentration camps were proposed now, today? They have you and me, and we're not going to stand for it. And we're going to go into the courts. We're going to go into every single place we can go, and we're going to advocate against injustice, period, racism. We need a group, though. We need each other. And that's something that as a transgender woman, I understand, because we are the most minuscule minority on the planet. We are also one of the most endangered in terms of people deciding that we don't belong on this planet. So to be a beleaguered community is something that I have some experience with. Being Asian American, being queer, and in my case, I almost invited. Because I feel like I can't help anybody unless I'm really open and notorious. That I've got to be out there and basically intruding upon people's comfort zones for the purpose of bringing them the truth, bringing them the reality, bringing them authenticity. and all the things that they're probably not used to and they're not comfortable with, but they do. To me, it matters in order to bring them into people's lives in the conversation. And it's their sensibility, sorry, but
Mm,
it's got to happen.
yeah. So, at what point did you decide to live your to address the mismatch? And
Oh,
because to my
2003.
understanding,
I would say 2003, when I turned 60, and the fact of turning 60 and facing the fact that I had spent 60 years in complete stealth was a completely embarrassing, shameful moment that
hmm,
I would be such a coward, that I would be such a phony, that I was fake,
wow,
that somehow or other, this entire life, and believe me, I still had all these honors and things like that, even before that, but um, they mattered not at all to me, zero, because it was given to somebody that wasn't me.
wow,
So at that point, I decided I couldn't live like that anymore. I refused. Uh, I came out. I started telling my close friends first, and the circles, go through your family. In my case, I had to go through my clients, and everybody else, community organization, I had to confront everybody. And I think that it's still part of the same process. I feel like all the way through being a pioneer as an Asian American lawyer in the trial courts doing jury trials, that it's the same thing with being a transgender lawyer. To me, it's like an even smaller minority, but hopefully that's exactly why I think I need a bigger voice. I mean, certainly I cannot be a shrinking violet. I can't hide in the shadows like I have a great deal of experience doing.
hmm.
um, that I had to somehow come out into the daylight and stand up and say, "This is who I am, and I'm. This is the place I'm forging for myself in this society and in this world." And that hopefully is enough for somebody else who hears about it, who I can get to somehow to let them know that hey, there's somebody else that's like me.
So because you wanted you said that you were hiding in the shadows for 60 years, but how did this impact your career? It's 2003 and this is new. So, I mean, one thing I keep thinking about is obviously how, the media or certain media outlets try to paint transitioning as like a way of like capital gain or like oh they're doing it to make money like
Right.
advertising that Bud Light Dylan Mulvaney, and it's like no, like for you. So like I just want to hear from you, like how did this impact your career?
Well, it's interesting because people like, for instance, that woman that's a swimmer, that's a transgender swimmer. Everybody
Right,
wants to say, "Oh, you're trying to do this to get an advantage, so
right.
you can get yourself a medal and stuff like that." Um, there is nobody in this world that ever goes through transition for the purpose of getting into an athletic contest. And the whole idea that somehow or other that this will be welcomed is in the idea that I always use the example of two women meeting out there in the street, and I'm saying, "Oh, well, what happened to your son? Oh, he went through a sex change. He's my daughter now." And I try to imagine the other neighbors saying, "Oh, you must be so happy. That's such a wonderful thing to happen to your son." That's not going to happen. Most instances, people will be shocked, in some cases appalled, etc., depending on their values, I guess. But the fact is that that moment is so important. So the way that I've always approached it when I was going to start going to court dressed, for instance, I took ornaments, things like that, earrings and stuff like that that have been given to me by my friends. I'm wearing the things that are given to me by the people that love me and support my transition. I'm going to liberate the criminal courts building tomorrow morning. I'm going to make them experience something that they've never experienced before and they can never unsee again. And I'm going to do that at the jails. I'm going to do that in the DA's office. I'm going to do it in the prison. I'm going to do it in every single place where I've ever been and continue to be. And so I had to have that sort of idea. I'm going to liberate the Compton courthouse. I'm going to liberate the criminal courts building. And this is going to be something that's going to be very uncomfortable for me. And again, something for which there's no roadmaps or role models. But if it helps other people to do it this way, then I've got to be as open as possible. And again, like I said, I got to be notorious. that's the reason why I really appreciate the opportunity on any kind of a podcast to speak my truth. Um, I certainly spoke a lot of bullshit for a lot of years, and I can offset for some of it.
So, because you mentioned the being embarrassed part, especially in the when you first transitioned. So I was going to ask you about the short term impact and the long term impact, but I think it's going to be more complex than just, how did this impact your mental health short term and long term? So I think just in the early days of when you transitioned, how did it impact your mental health in both, were there pros and were there cons, or was it, I'd be surprised if it was a clear cut, it was pure liberation.
Well, no, not at all.
Right.
There's obviously going to be resistance in certain quarters because it is uncomfortable to experience somebody in a way that you've never experienced with them before, and you always know them a certain way. So there is the weight of the past in that regard in terms of people's perception and the way they accept you currently. In other words, if I had a pretty good relationship with anybody, then it was a pretty good transition. If I didn't, then there was basically nothing at all because it would just be like they didn't know who I was, kind of thing. So that was fine. I mean, again, I'm just there to assert myself, and if this makes it easier for anybody else coming behind me, and definitely, let me just say this: once I came out, a couple of DAs came out
Mm.
after me, and I
Wow.
and I'm sure because I've talked to them, I'm sure they could not have come out, period, or they wouldn't have found the courage unless I had done it first.
Right.
So so people following me in my wake, I always felt like, same thing, right? You got to be a great lawyer. You can't be a schlub. You know what I mean? Not if you're representing your community. You got to be really good. You got to be as good as
Hmm.
you can be. So all of these things, I think, happen as much in the queer community today as they did in the Asian community back in the 60s and 70s. Today, there's plenty of Asian Americans in the law. We're all over the place. So I don't worry about our inclusion in school. I worry about Black and Brown people being excluded from higher education across the country. It's been happening even in the coasts. So that's still my crusade. That's still something that's really important to me because as long as I've been around, the reason why Asian people were in law school, we just didn't go. I mean, basically, we weren't applying. I'm sure of that because um, our academic record is certainly as good as anybody else. And as it turns out, our ability to be lawyers and to behave and to produce and contribute as lawyers is as good as anybody else's, really. So um, I think that we've never it wasn't anything we ever anything to prove. It was always the lawyers of color
Right.
trying to establish that we could perform as well as the white boys. They don't believe it, but we know it's true, and we're going to be able to show it. We're going to have to produce for the purpose of coming to that conclusion, but we will. So
Hmm.
that was an inevitability in my view. I think most people have the same view as me. If you're a minority lawyer, you do feel as though you got some obligation to
Mm.
community. So I think most ones, unless the parasites that exist in every community, um, they only see things for themselves.
Uh,
Period. So
so, so yeah, so it sounds like, or it's clear that it was multifaceted in terms of the short term impact on your mental health. But long term, you've had your years removed now from when you first transitioned, when you first came out. How has it impacted your mental health in the long term now?
I think it's spectacular. The difference between where I was before my transition and where I am now, 20 years into it, um, is spectacular. Especially in comparison. I mean, think about that. I spent 60 years, as Michael, and
Mm.
it's interesting because the more acclaim you get in a particular identity, the harder it is to give it up.
Uh,
I
right.
mean, in one facet, to just talk about, I needed to get old for this to happen in some ways because I love women. I've always loved women. And I'll tell you the truth. I mean, ever since I was probably 6 years old, I adored women. I just loved all the girls because I always had a crush. And even when the girls were completely hated by the boys and everything else, I just loved them. I had crushes all the way to first grade. And so all the way through those 60 years, it was really easy because I was falling in love left and right with women, with beautiful women, and I would have great relationships with them. But I'd have this identity issue just lurking there, haunting me, waking up with it, going to sleep with it. It would not leave me alone. You think that, and we believe that because we're idealists, that love can conquer all, that you can somehow conquer everything, including that, and you're wrong. It's wrong. The real problem, the thing I do tell out there is that this is a complete inevitability about this particular identity. And as you age, it becomes consistently, progressively more insistent that your libido is going downhill, your need to transition is going uphill. It's a thing that it really in old age, it was you know, I'm sitting up here playing some guitar, I'm doing some benefit, and all of a sudden, it's my 60th birthday, people have a surprise birthday party. And everybody's up there on the microphone talking about what a great person I am. And I'm thinking, how would you feel if I would kill that dude? That's what I was thinking at that part. I never forget,
Wow.
60, happy 60th birthday. What a milestone. Oh, you've done all these great things in your life. You've been this leader, you've been blah, blah. And I'm thinking, what if I killed that dude?
Wow.
Literally, that was going through my head. And but at that moment, I decided, I'm done with this. I'm going to
Yeah.
start. I started walking around the party telling them I'm trans. I'm going to be going
Wow.
through a sex change, and if you don't like it, sorry.
Uh-huh.
I was going through this, and so the mental health. Let me just say this: I spent at least 20 years going through serious therapy, minimum 20, but probably as many as 40, because off and on I wasn't always in. But the last therapy, the most profoundly influential therapy I went through was group therapy
Wow.
with other transgender people. And watching people, because I knew when I was a typical cis heterosexual male, loved women, you know, and this almost happened to me. I was seeing these guys who were married with children, who whose families could not accept their gender issues, and they were struggling, and they were sent to therapy by their families, or people who were business people whose companies needed them to be there. And I see their lives. I remember watching them and thinking, you know, they talk about what anxiety they're going through with their wife and kids. And I'm thinking, I'm never going to get married. I'm never going to drag some poor woman through my transition. I'm never going to drag these kids through transition. I refuse because I'm seeing what kind of struggles these guys go through. I mean, I was already 70 years old when my wife came along. I figured this is the truth. I had dodged it, man. I'm 70 years old. You know, dating is over. All that sort of bebop is in the past. I don't have to deal with it. And then this thing happens. I remember at the time being just I sit in these therapy sessions and I feel so bad for these guys. They can't transition. Their family won't stand for it. It's like they reminded me of the kids I represented when I was in public defender, when I was in
Ugh.
juvenile court, working with 13 or 14-year-old kids who are trans, and they get kicked out of their homes, because their families don't like the way they dress. And so they end up in the streets and they end up doing stuff to survive.
Wow.
And they end up in juvenile hall
Yeah.
on my
Yeah.
caseload. And I have to say, those people used to put me to shame, though. I mean, here I was, a public defender. I was relatively, educated and everything else. These are little kids, man. And they had more courage than me. They stood up to their families and ready to walk out of the house and live on the streets rather than not be themselves. I had such respect for them. Um, but I couldn't do anything for them. I mean, they would always end up in foster homes and stuff. I would try to get the parents to take them home. I remember that. That was my big struggle. Please take them home. I can get the judge to do it. This is minor offenses. I can't take him home. His brothers will kill him. They
Wow.
promised to kill him. They threatened to kill him. I can't bring him home.
Wow.
I will not endanger my child that way. And looking at that and trying to find a place for myself in the world while this is all going on, and every time I go out to the streets, people I never meet were drag queen prostitutes, and in case of the nightclubs, female impersonators. And I I would become friendly with them at least, and I guess they'd get to see me around, that kind of thing. But then I'd realize that we had nothing in common. We weren't very much alike, and I didn't connect to them very well at all. And I remember feeling like I'm really alone. Nobody else is like me. Just and that's another mismatch. I mean, when you're dressed up as a woman, believe me, it's not the women who are interested in you. This is very opposite. It's really uncomfortable.
Huh.
Um, but it gives you a taste of what women have to go through
Right.
themselves. You just walking down the street, trying to just live your life without people intruding upon you. So that's good for you. It's interesting. I mean, this is kind of an aside, but I just had cataract surgery, and before that, I was walking around stumbling. I couldn't barely see and shit. And it's like this. I got a deep appreciation of my vision and what it would be like to be a blind person or a
Uh,
person who's really sight impaired person. And it really gave me that grateful feeling that these gifts are not to be taken for granted at all. Basically, you have to be grateful. You
right.
know. So yeah, to continue on with the conversation, all of that I'm grateful for. And my mental health is, like I say, spectacular. I would have to describe it as that because I feel so strong and so healthy. I feel like whatever happens, I've got the courage to face it. I have the will to follow through with it, and all of those things because I am authentic, because I'm real, and that I'm asserting my right to it. And then as long as I'm doing that, then whatever happens to me, I feel like I fulfill myself, my life in many ways. One of the things I remember going to court, they did an article on me, the Daily Journal, which is a legal daily paper, and they did a feature on me. And I remember I went to court, sent letters to all the judges about being, coming to court and I'm going to be dressed and blah, blah, blah. And the one judge, the hanging judge of Los Angeles, I had a death penalty case in front of him. And I said, Judge, I can't keep going on this case. If you decide there's any kind of prejudice to my client by my gender transition, you got to take me off the case. And I refuse to keep going. And he said, No, I read the article about you in the paper, in the legal paper, and the part where you said, if you couldn't die as a woman, you'd feel like you never lived. And then he started to choke up. Now, nobody in the court had ever seen that before in history. But I was stunned. My client was stunned. I looked at the lawyers behind me, and their jaws were dropping. I mean, it was like amazing. I'd never seen it. He got choked up. He went back into chambers and came back out. This is a judge used to wear a gun under his robes.
Uh,
He was a death penalty advocate for the prosecution. I don't know how many people he put on death row, but I know he was well-meaning, but he was a very wicked man in a lot of ways because he would really send down harsh sentences and harsh results on cases that I didn't feel were justified at all. It was always just like, oh, this is a horrible crime, you're gone. But anyway, so that was his reaction. He actually
wow.
had some measure. I mean, it really affected him, and I had a lot of that actually going around. And at first, my first reaction was I was moved to tears by how little I had expected from my peers and from the system. But people have said to me, says, you had 30, 40 years in the system. It's not like you didn't have a history. It wasn't like anybody didn't know you. You are still the same person you've been for all those decades. He said, and once that was clear, it made everybody a lot more relaxed about it. Still the same person, presenting different, no question.
Right.
And believing. I mean, but my assertion of myself absolutely has been, I feel like, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of uncomfortable situations because I can't be what is comfortable for everybody.
Right.
Going to bring some discomfort in people's lives. I understand the burden that is. I really don't like doing that to my friends and relatives. But the truth has to be sometimes radically presented in order to be radically accepted. That's kind of like the way I look at it. I'm not going to soft pedal it or give it to people in stages, so to speak. It is what it is. And I'm going to
Right.
continue to sort it 100%. I'm not going to hold anything back. I spent a whole lifetime holding shit back, you know.
Right. Right.
So at this point, in terms of mental health, I mean, I guess the world, I could be happier. Russia could withdraw from Ukraine. There's a lot of different ways that I could be happier, I guess, in this world. But gee, mental health, what I've got inside of me is extraordinarily comforting. And whatever adversity I have to face outside of this, outside of myself, I feel like I'm strong enough to face it.
Wow.
And I announce that to people all the time. You know what I mean? If it's got to come my way, then fine. I feel like I'm the one who should face it.
Right. So one thing that strikes me in kind of wrapping things up here is, I mean, it's been clear through articles written about you and the awards you've received, but one thing that you said a while back was the DAs that would come out after you did. And those are in-person experiences where it's been proven that you're a role model to people. What does that mean to you to kind of present that roadmap for other people to follow and to have be a role model to people? Like what kind of, when you look back on things, what kind of comfort or feelings does that give you?
I'm extraordinarily satisfied with the idea that I've made room for other people because that's what I set out to do. And if I can make it easier for people to be themselves, if I can bring some measure of comfort or relief to people that are struggling with coming out, then I feel like then yeah, I've been useful. I've been helpful. I mean, what else can we be in this world? I
Right.
feel like it's always been my place to be useful and to be helpful to other people. This being a lawyer, I'm helping other people who are in trouble, who need my help. That's a way to have a purpose in my life, and I think that, right? I mean, we know that. If you've got a purpose to drive towards, then it's like you can always judge your actions by the purity of your intention. It is really important that we live up to our values, that we live up to our ideals, and that we hold fast to our values, to me, and take all the adversity we've got to face, all the horror, all the sadness, all the suffering, and all of it is part of our humanity. I believe that it contributes to the evolution of our spirit, and that it can absolutely elevate us. I feel that way very strongly. So I'm willing to take on what I've got to take on. It's I wasn't here for comfort, you know. I was here for the challenges of this world, and I feel like they, the whole point of these things is that they are worth doing, and that is whatever how hard it is or whatever it is. That if it's worth doing, then we take that on, and that's what I'm going to do. That's what we choose to do. So all of this time, I feel completely liberated. Yeah, I mean, I'm not worried about my cover stories or my or any other alterations of my life and my history. I completely embrace it all now, and shine a light on it. And I'm not going to hide from any of it, and that includes now. I feel like I've got to be as completely honest with you as possible because there's no value to bullshit. There's no value to falsity and lies. I feel like the only people that profit from that are the fascists and the bullies and people that would like to have everybody look at the world their way. Our truth has to keep shining through. Our truth is in many ways all we have. So why would we not embrace it? Why would we not, in my case, certainly, why would I not just absolutely project it and and be what I give to the world? I feel like my voice, my presence, all these things are important things that I give to the world essentially and try to make it better. Um, I think Charles Hamilton, he was a mentor to the great Thurgood Marshall. He used to say that any lawyer who is not a social engineer is a parasite on society. And I've already seen that with respect to the legal profession, certainly. There's people that absolutely are not making things any better, um, who are just sitting pat and are making things worse. It is the way that they do nothing to make it better that makes things worse. And that's what he was talking about. I think back in the 1920s, talking about lawyers and their obligations to society. And it still remains true. I mean, what kind of a life is that for people? Sure, you live in luxury and stuff like that, but um, the effect it has on the rest of the world is extraordinarily important. One rich person can impoverish 1,000 poor people, and I've always looked at it that way. There's a cause of justice, and then there's a cause of most legal professionals. Put it that way.
Well, Mia, thank you so much for that and for all your time. We are wrapping up here soon. I do a quick fire round to end it. People
Sure.
sometimes say it's the hardest part, but I think it's just
I
kind
don't
of
think
fun.
so.
Is there anything you'd like to say before I get to some of these fun questions?
Just support PFLAG, support the parents of transgender kids, support transgender kids. Um, Fight for the rights of the people that have the least power.
Mm-hmm.
That is an important aspect of it. Give a voice to the voiceless.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. And I great way to end the more serious part.
Okay.
But the first one is of this quickfire round is if you could
Sure.
invite 5 people to dinner, dead or alive, who would they be?
Dead or alive? Probably. Oh God. Let me see. Muhammad, um, Abraham, um, Winston Churchill,
Huh.
um, James Joyce, and John Ford.
Okay. As mentioned earlier, you have won many awards and you've commentated for different outlets. You've had a lot of accomplishments, and you've also spoken to some very powerful people. With all that said, have you ever been starstruck by anyone you've met?
I think Bruce Springsteen. I was starstruck,
Wow.
by him. I still think he's a great musician. I met all the guys in the band actually, very same.
Wow.
What happened was I was representing some of the staffers on the crew on the tour, and so I got backstage passes for almost for 2 years.
Wow.
I went to as many shows as I possibly could, and so I was backstage all the time. But he was the one that he didn't get into conversation. It was like he just mumble something and walk away. Especially when he's backstage, he's all business. But when I was hanging out back there, I would talk with Clarence Clemens. Do you know anything about the band?
I don't, but I just know that Springsteen's known for being like one of the great touring artists.
Right.
That's
If you
all I
ever
know.
see him in concerts, like, whoa, he's pretty
Uh-huh.
amazing. But in any event, so yeah, I was starstruck by him, I have to say.
Wow. Very cool. Is there anyone else, or is that like is that the guy?
That's got to be it. I mean, I can't
Uh-huh.
think of anything else. I mean, I've met
Wow.
a lot of different people in my life, but that was the one I have to admit. Where I was just kind of like I was at a loss for words.
Yeah. Um, in the same vein, is it possible for you to identify a greatest accomplishment of your life so far?
My transition,
Wow.
as far as I'm concerned, that's the greatest accomplishment of my life, and it's an
Wow.
accomplishment. You
Yeah.
got to get it done. You got to go through a whole lot of surgery and crap like that, and you've got to put a burden of
Yeah.
on everybody around you.
That's
But
amazing.
yeah, but accomplishment, yeah, that's the way I look at everything else. No, I don't look at it that way. I mean,
Wow.
I will say this in terms of having a rock and roll band for 25 years, leading a band, being a lead singer was one of the great experiences of my life. I have to say, to go into a big ballroom and to walk into that place and everybody's milling around having conversations. Start with the music, having the whole place explode into dancing. Um, I wish everybody could experience that. I mean, really,
Yeah.
because especially a lead singer, that you get so much attention. I mean, you're not even deserved. I was in a band with a whole bunch of ringers. These guys had long careers as professional musicians. I got to the point. I'll share this with you. I would and walk into bars and stuff. I always think, gee, I hope these guys like us. So I told the audience. And after 10 or 15 years, I would walk in and I'd say, pretty soon you're all going to be smiling. And then you're going to hear the music and you're all going to be dancing. And by the
Awesome.
end of the evening, you're going to want to take me home with you.
Mia, a common thread I've seen now is that you had quite a bit of game with with the people you're interested in. It seems like you had like some good pickup lines or something to you,
No,
but
it's interesting. The people thought that I think all my friends they were so blown away when I transitioned. They said, "God, we used to see you with all these women all the time, so, all these beautiful women." But I was one of these people. I guess I was the kind of guy that hung out with a lot of good-looking women, but I was totally monogamous. I mean, serially. You know what I mean? I would never mess around on the woman I was
right.
with. But going to an event or something like that with somebody was normal, and I was the kind of guy really that was much more easy for women to be around because it was basically a woman. I mean, so I had a lot of company and a lot of really good friends, and it was amazing. I can't tell you the number of people thought that I was such a dog. You know what I mean? But I wasn't, honestly.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to me. It doesn't seem like you were a dog. It just seems like you got what you wanted in an
Well,
appropriate way. Like,
I got a pretty good rap. No, I mean,
um,
what's crazy about women, I think it showed. I absolutely I adore them.
uh, to round it out, and I don't think. I mean, I think you could write a book about your game. in that way, but I hope it's in the works because I think it's much well deserved. But what would or what is the title of your autobiography be?
Good question. I had this one thing about Confessions of a Transgender Defender,
Huh.
but it just sounded too corny for me, so I couldn't use that, you know. So I don't know. I mean, I really don't. I mean, I never thought about. Honestly, I've written some stuff for people, stuff like that. That like like we're doing this type of thing, and we talk a little bit about your history and stuff, But a unified memoir, yeah. An agent actually contacted me. I wrote him something, and he said it sucked. That was the end of He said I sounded too much like a lawyer, which I probably do.
Yeah. Well, I hope something comes out eventually. Because I loved talking to you. I've loved
Much good
reading
talking
about
to you
you.
too. I appreciated the conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, and I hope we have another opportunity down the road.
I hope so.
I look forward to watching your speech on Facebook. And yeah,
It was
Mia,
just
thank you
Thursday
so
night, as
much.
a matter of fact. Thursday
Oh,
night,
okay.
I was in front of criminal justice section.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Well,
But check it
I'm
out
gonna have to
because it
look
was
up all your
successful.
speeches. Yeah.
Because part of it is like just like this conversation. I really don't prepare for anything, and the same thing with the speeches. You know what I mean? So I'm not quite sure what I'm going to say. I got a couple things kind of in my mind, and then I just go. So
Wow.
you'll enjoy it.
Cool. Cool.
I
Well, Mia,
promise
again,
you.
thank you so
All
much.
right.
I look forward to talking again.
Great. My pleasure. And thanks for that. Terrific talking to you, man. This was a lot
Great.
of fun.
Great. Thank you again to Mia for being on the podcast and discussing her transition, discussing her career, discussing her upbringing, discussing so much. And I mean, she really is just such an amazing speaker and was an honor to get to chat. So, with all that said, I hope you enjoyed this episode and hearing from Mia. And you could subscribe to our show for more episodes that release on every other Tuesday. Give us a rating or review on your favorite podcast platform. If you would like to support our podcast and help us grow, you can do so with a donation to the link at the bottom of the episode description. To hear more about Changing Tides, follow us on Instagram at LTSC_Changing Tides or check out our website, thechangingtides.org. Let's continue to change the tide on mental health.
Yeah.